Wow. I haven't talked about Pony since Valentine's Day. Oh, and spoiler alert, I guess. It's been about a month since I last did a scripted video covering MLP. Over that time period, I've been talking about various other subjects and those videos have been pretty well received. But today we're gonna jump back to ponies for a sec. Because it's been so long since I last talked about dem horses, I wanted to come back with a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. It started out as a minor interest, but it's progressively bumped up my priority list with recent events like the Season 5 finale and Siege of the Crystal Empire. The subject in question? MLP villain reformations. Keep in mind, when I say villains, I mean real villains. Like I said in my Principal Cinch video, there's a distinction between antagonists and villains, and I'm only going to be talking about the latter here. This means no Trixie, no Diamond Tiara, and no Gilda. We're only talking about the big baddies here. Now, this kind of subject is a pretty broad one to tackle, so for the sake of this video, I'm gonna break my thoughts down to three main questions. The first being, are villain reformations bad? This is the simplest question of the three and it's the easiest for me to answer. Villain reformations, in and of themselves, aren't bad. I like to think that there are no bad ideas, only bad executions, and villain reformations are no exception. When done well, they provide an interesting story arc, and in some cases they can really shake up the character dynamics. What makes reforming a villain different and more difficult than reforming a regular antagonist is that more often than not, a villain's actions are more severe and harder to forgive. Yeah, it takes a lot to forgive someone for bullying you as a child, but when you compare it to, say, leading an invasion into the nation's capital and almost taking over the city while your soldiers victimize the citizens, the latter is a bit harder to get over, especially if you happen to live in that city. But just because a villain reform is hard to pull off, doesn't mean it's impossible. One of, if not my favorite example, has got to be Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. While he was a clear-cut villain in Book 1, it's towards the end of that season and throughout Book 2 that we see his alignment begin to blur, to the point where he switches sides halfway through Book 3. This is one of the best examples of a villain reformation because not only is there a clear character arc that leads to them switching sides, but there's also a reasonable level of doubt from the other characters on whether or not their change is legit. So, we know that villain reformations can be good if they're well executed. Which begs the next question, does MLP pull off villain reformations well? Right off the heels of the easiest question, this one is probably the trickiest. MLP has done villain reformations quite often compared to other shows, and if I had to make a guess as to why it's done so often, as far-fetched as this guess may be, I'd say that Luna Eclipsed has had at least a minimal role. It's a common favorite among fans of the show, and while Nightmare Moon had been purified in the previous season, this episode gives us our first taste of an MLP villain reformation, since we see how Luna is trying to adjust to life in modern Equestria after her purification. Luna has since become a very popular and well-liked character, so perhaps DHX wants to replicate that by reforming other villains. Again, it's quite the stretch, but I digress. I find MLP to be kinda iffy when it comes to how well it pulls off its reformations. As stated before, a reformation involves the character arc that leads to the villain switching sides and their adjustment into their new role. To be honest, I don't think MLP has done a single villain reformation where they nail both parts. The first part of the process is rarely, if ever, done well. For example, once Sunset became good, she had a very hard time being accepted by the other CHS students, and she had to build their trust from the ground up. But when it came to the build up to her turning good, she just started tearing up once she was defeated. And the thing is, this is probably one of the two instances where MLP has come the closest to a great reformation arc. The other example being, believe it or not, Discord. Ever since Keep Calm and Flutter On, Discord has received criticism for his wavering loyalty, especially at the end of Season 4. But I really like that aspect of his reformation because it shows that it's not an easy road, especially for a character like him. Both his and Sunset Shimmer's arcs have the best representation of the latter part of the villain reformation process, the part where the villain has to get used to being on the good side. They're not going to gain everyone's trust right away, and they might be tempted to revert to how they used to be. In fact, they might even relapse, but that's what makes it interesting. While it has come close, I don't think MLP has completely nailed villain reformations yet, but even if every reform up till now was done perfectly, there's still the last question. Are MLP villain reformations overdone? I wasn't sure about this one at first, but recently I'm more inclined to say yes. I mean, let's just break this down for a second. So far, across FIM and the Equestria Girls movies, we've had 8 major villains: Nightmare Moon, Discord, Chrysalis, Sombra, Sunset Shimmer, T-Rex, the Sirens, which I count as one unit, and Starlight Glimmer. Of those 8 main villains, 4 of them were redeemed so far. That's half of MLP's main villains to date. And if you want to include the comics, Sombra's reformation at the end of Siege of the Crystal Empire bumps the total up to 5. But let's say that you don't count the comics, or the Equestria Girls movies. You only count the TV show and disregard all other forms of media. Even then, you're still left with 3 reformed villains and 3 unreformed villains. That's still a 50-50 ratio. Yes, the show's subtitle is Friendship is Magic. The power that friendship holds was one of the show's founding themes, a theme that has remained present in the show. But from a storytelling standpoint, I feel that villain reformations have been happening a little too often. They've gotten to the point where they've reached Naruto levels of predictability, and it just gets boring after a while. After I finished the first episode of season 5, my first thought about Starlight Glimmer was that she was going to be redeemed by the end of the season. And to no surprise, she was. Even if every reformation was done perfectly, and all of them were well written, they lose their flavor after so many times. Do I think reformation should be done away with completely? No, not at all. But I do hope that we get at least a good break from them for a while and have DHX try something new with their villains. With what little we know about season 6, it's too early to tell whether or not they will, so we'll just have to wait and see. So what do you think about villain reformations in MLP? Are they done well? Are they done too often? Swarm that comment section below or bug me on social media, and consider supporting me through Patreon or PayPal art commissions. Until next time, keep it sketchy, folks.